Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Steven here with Team Euphoric, and this is day 12 of the 80 Days to Your Dream Body course. Today's protein source is going to be herring, and today is a chest training workout. And the theme for today's video is going to be exercise order. So I'm going to be going over several factors to consider when determining which order to put your exercises in. Let's get started. And while we're resting, let's discuss how your training goal will affect your exercise order. With regard to your training goal, your primary goal is going to determine what exactly is going to be your priority. For the general population, you would want to order your exercises strength first, then hypertrophy, and then your endurance based exercises. For sport specific programs, you would want to go focusing on the biomotor abilities. Once again, your biomotor abilities, there are 8 of them. There's speed, strength, power, endurance, flexibility, agility, coordination, and balance. Let's say your main objective is strength. You would want to start with your high intensity strength based exercises first, then progress to the moderate ones, and then finish off with the low intensity ones. An excellent example of this is Louis Simmons's conjugate method for powerlifters. If you're somebody who is interested in powerlifting, then the conjugate method, the way it works is on your max effort days, you would pick your max effort exercise, which is going to be either your squat, your deadlift, or your bench press, and you would perform 1 to 3 repetitions. So it's very, very high intensity. Then you would move on to your supplemental work. Your supplemental work is going to be an exercise that is going to focus on a weak point of one of your main lifts. And this, you're going to perform it for 6 to 12 repetitions. So it's more in that moderate intensity zone. And then you're going to get into your accessory work. Your accessory work, this is going to be things that are also going to contribute to elevating your main lift. And in that, you're doing roughly 8 to 15 repetitions. And then you would finish off with your other exercise. Your other exercise, that would essentially be your accessory exercises, things like rotator cuff work and also your grip training. With regard to intensity, high intensity, you could consider that 85% or greater of your 1 repetition maximum. You could consider moderate intensity 70 to 85% of your 1 repetition maximum. Low intensity is going to be 60 to 70% of your 1 rep max. And then with regard to things like postural exercises or accessory work, that would be very low intensity and it would be below 60% of your 1 repetition maximum. Let's say your goal is hypertrophy if you want to be a bodybuilder or if you just want to build bigger muscles. The target muscle that you are trying to build is going to be what you would put at the front of the program. So if you are trying to build your chest first, then that would be at the front of your program. And then with regard to endurance training, you would want to put the compound exercises first. That way we could challenge your stamina. But our rest period is up. Time for set number 2. And while we're resting, let's discuss how your training age will affect the exercise order. Your training age being your level of experience. With regard to beginners, you want to start simple, things like body weight exercises at the beginning of the program. Then you could progress to something like compound exercises. The reason being is you want to develop the skill and proficiency in the exercise that you are performing. Whereas with advanced athletes, you would want to put very complex exercises first at the beginning of the program, like your explosive movements, like your snatches. Then you would do your compound lifts, then your isolation, and then at the end of the program, it would be the opposite of the beginner. You would place your body weight exercises at the end of the program. The reason being is your explosive compound lifts, those are going to require a very high level of skill and motor control. So if you place them at the end of the program, you're going to be a lot more tired, and the chances that your form breaks down and you end up getting injured is going to be a lot higher. So that's why you want to place it at the beginning of the program. Now, how exactly would this look in a real world setting? Let's say a beginner program. For a beginner who is going to be doing a leg focused workout, you would want to do something like body weight squats first. Then you could progress to something like dumbbell squats, and then you could move them on to something like a leg press. However, let's say you're somebody who's an intermediate. With an intermediate, you could start them off with something like barbell back squats. Then you could get them onto a leg press, and then you could finish off with something like either hamstring curls or some type of knee extension work. Let's say you are an advanced athlete. If you are an advanced lifter, you would want to start with your explosive, powerful movements, something like your snatch. Then, after your snatch, you could do something like an overhead squat because while it is still neurologically demanding, it's not quite as complex as the snatch. Then you would do something like a barbell back squat, and then you could finish off with something like a leg press. But for beginners, intermediates, and advanced, the general rule is you always want to start with the most complex first and then work to the easiest. The only difference is with the beginners is you would want to start with some body weight first. That way they could develop some skill and proficiency with regard to the actual exercises. And with the advanced athletes, you can incorporate more dynamic, explosive exercises like the snatch or the clean. But our rest is up. Time for set number 3. And while we're resting, let's discuss how your training split and your training frequency will affect your exercise order. The first thing that we need to consider is how often is a muscle being trained. If you are training a particular muscle multiple times per week, it may benefit you to do some type of alternate intensity training. So let's say you are doing something like high intensity squats on Monday and you're going to be training legs again on Wednesday. On Wednesday, it may benefit you to do something like moderate intensity lunges instead. That way, it's going to allow for greater neural recovery. A great example of this is the conjugate method that was developed by Louis Simmons. Louis Simmons was one of my teachers and he coached some of the greatest powerlifters in the world. And the way that it worked is you would have 2 max effort days where you went all out, and then you had 2 dynamic effort days where you just focused on speed and velocity. With regard to an actual real world setting, let's discuss different types of training splits and how exactly this would look in real world. Let's say you wanted to do something like a full body split. It may benefit you to do something like a lower body pushing exercise followed by an upper body pulling, an upper body pushing exercise, and then a lower body pulling. Let's say you are doing something like an upper lower split. It would benefit you to alternate between your back and chest muscles, so you could alternate pushing and pulling. And then at the end of the program, you could alternate between your biceps and triceps, so your elbow flexors and your elbow extensors. Let's say you're doing a lower body workout. If you're doing a lower body workout, same thing. You could alternate between lower body pushing and pulling exercises. Once again, your lower body pushing, that's going to be your knee extension exercises like your squats and your lunges. And then your lower body pulling exercises, that is going to be your hip extension and knee flexion work, things like your deadlifting and your hip hinging patterns. But with regard to the actual body parts, one of the things that would be ideal is you would want to start proximal to distal. So think, if you're training chest and back, for chest, you would start at the pecs, then you would move on to the anterior deltoid, and then you would move on to the triceps. So you could do your bench pressing, you could do your overhead pressing, and then finish off with some tricep work. Same thing with the back. We're going to start with the lats, we're going to move on to the delts, and then finish off with the biceps. So we could do things like your rowing first, then you could do all of your fly work, and then you could finish off with some bicep curls. But that is it. It is time for your rest is up. It is time for set number 4. And while we're resting, let's discuss how your time availability will affect your exercise order. If you are somebody who is very limited on time, you want to place the most important exercises first. That way, you can hit the most important exercises before your time runs out. And if you run out of time, you could just skip out on the accessory exercises. So with regard to the most important, those are going to be your compound lifts, your primal patterns. Those are going to be first. That's going to be things like your pushing, pulling, bending, lunging, squatting, and twisting exercises. You could also do things like superset your exercises. That is when you perform 2 exercises back to back. And with regard to supersetting, there are a couple ways that you could do this. You could either perform an exercise, rest, perform the second exercise, rest, and then go right back to the start. Or you could perform the 2 exercises back to back and then take a rest after the 2 exercises have been completed. With regard to supersetting, you could either superset your upper body and lower body, or you could superset agonist and antagonistic muscles. If you're doing upper and lower, you could do something like squats followed by rows. That way you're training the lower body and the upper body. Or if you want to train agonistic and antagonistic muscle groups, then you could do something like you're pushing and pulling. So you're training your chest first, and then you're training your back afterwards. The other thing that we can do is if we are limited for time, we can incorporate circuit training. With regard to circuit training, the way that you would want to do this is you would want to have as minimal overlap as possible. So one of the things that you could do is have something like a squatting exercise first, then progress to a pulling exercise, because after your squats, your back and biceps are going to be completely fresh. Then progress to a pushing exercise, because now that we've done back and biceps, it's time to train chest and triceps since those are nice and fresh. And then you would finish off with something like your deadlifting, because by the time you've done your pushing and pulling, you've had a nice break between your squats and your deadlifts. The other thing that we could do is we could incorporate multi-pattern movements. So if you wanted to really save time, you could do something like a squat to a push press, or a deadlift to an upright row, or you could do something like a lunge to a twist. That way you could incorporate all 6 of the primal patterns in just 3 different exercises. But your rest is up. Time for the 5th and final set. Thanks for sticking around until the end of the video. Be sure to like, share, and leave a comment as it'll help the algorithm. And if you enjoyed the content, show your support by subscribing to the channel by clicking on the icon in the bottom right corner. And if you really want to show your support, then consider becoming a member by clicking on the icon in the bottom left corner. These new high-quality videos aren't cheap to edit, and the $5 membership will really help with the video editing budget. You'll also get access to a ton of exclusive perks like early access to videos and this program design lecture playlist in the top right-hand corner. And if you want to learn how to do a one-armed pull-up, then check out the playlist on the top left corner.